So very good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good
Atul
afternoon.
So
Yeah.
welcome to the session, sir, post-lunch session.
Thank you.
I welcome all the participants to the post-lunch session of day two. I request all the participants to turn on your cameras to take a group photo, sir. Please, sir, just for a minute. So we have missed the photo in the morning session. So I request all the participants to turn on your cameras to take a group photo. On your cameras. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you. Sir, Atul sir, you
Yes,
can please sir carry on. You can go ahead, sir.
sure, sure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so welcome back. I think these post-lunch sessions are generally the most difficult ones. For us, this time it will be a bit more difficult because there are quite a few things which we have to be taking up, and let us see to what extent I can cover uh, in this session. So more or less this is what we will be seeing, that is uh, there is this aspect of the search which is called as the local search methods, and it is related to the optimization methods also. So some of these aspects are common and well known in that. uh, One term which you are seeing here, which is the genetic algorithms, I won't be taking up much on that. Just to tell you that how this search etc. is all related, and it is related to the general things, general scheme of things which is there in AI. And in fact, by itself, each one of these methods, basically the simulated annealing, genetic algorithms, etc., is a research topic by itself. Gradient methods by itself. So, say for example, if you are seeing that how do the deep learning methods how they are learning, so they are also gradient methods itself. They are also gradient methods only. Okay, so the learning approach which is there for the weight adjustment in the deep learning methods, that is also a gradient method only. Okay, and the solution to some difficult optimization problems is been coming through the simulated annealing approaches. So as a tool, one need to have some awareness of that. There are so many other approaches which I cannot take up here, say like taboo search, and there are so many other such approaches as well. So, but we can't take it up here due to the limited time, etc. But I'm just trying to give you some idea like what all kind of things are possible. Okay. So as we proceed forward on that, okay, would anyone have any questions or queries? So before I commence, we can commence, or I can just go ahead and start. So okay, so what we saw was that we were previously trying to explore systematically the search space, and we saw that one can search it more effectively if we are having certain heuristics. Okay, I could not show you certain working out, but if you work.
Sir, sorry to disturb. Your microphone is off, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had been speaking with my microphone off. I think I'm more audible now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for pointing out. So I'll just reel back. Okay, I had asked whether anybody had any question with respect to whatever I had spoken previously. And here what I was saying is that the methods which I'm showing you on the screen here, these are some of the methods which that search techniques which are very universal. Okay, they are so useful and they are very universal all over the world, and for so many kinds of things. Like for solving of optimization problems, the gradient methods and the simulated annealing methods are well known. And for the different types of the optimization problems, the generic algorithms and the different types of iterative search methods which are there, they are also quite useful. In fact, a huge amount of research is going on with respect to the genetic algorithms. Simulated annealing, huge research already took place. All right, so it is a well-known field, and people are not really doing too much on that now. In the gradient methods, they are being used to optimize the learning of the weights, which is there in the deep learning and the neural methods. Okay, so these are the things. And but hill climbing, etc., I have to explain to you just so that you get some idea like what is going on. Okay, so I was saying that whether anyone had any question or query, they can feel free to interrupt and ask. So with that, then I'll go ahead and explain the need for this local search and optimization approaches. So what we saw previously is that if there was a problem, we would explore the search space. We can explore the search space first of all, maybe in a depth first manner, or in a breadth first manner, or in a iterative depth first manner. So these are all the approaches which are giving the methods which are they are complete in the sense that they will find a solution if there one exists, and there is a trade-off of the storage space versus the complexity of the search between breadth first search and depth first search, and with breadth first search being admissible, whereas depth first search is not admissible. Okay, so like the last time we said that what is the important uh, thing of an algorithm being admissible? It has to be admissible if it is going to be finding the most nearest solution, the best solution, okay, the least cost solution. So if it is finding the least cost solution, optimal solution, that algorithm has to be admissible. Or if there is a heuristic which is guiding the search, that heuristic should be admissible. Okay, so in all those things that we are trying to search a path to the goal. Okay, that is the thing. Whereas in some problems, the path is not relevant at all. Okay, so for example, this 8 queens problem. In 8 queens problem, we just have to somehow place the queens in the non-attacking positions, and the moment we have placed them, then we are done. We don't have to remember that which were the false steps which we took, etc. Okay, so that is just to give you some idea that why the local search and optimization methods are also needed. How do we go about it? So how we go about it is that first we keep track of what is the what is the current state, and then we will move only to the neighboring states. Okay, and so the advantage is that the because you don't have to remember so many other states, the memory requirements is reduced very much, and one can find the reasonable solutions in the large or the infinite state spaces. Okay. Um, and when we want to apply to the pure optimization approaches, all the states will have an objective function, and we have to find the maximum or minimum, or rather the extremum value for that objective function. Okay, and we don't really have to keep full information or track the path, cost information, etc. Okay, so for in these kind of problems, what is called as local search will be quite adequate. Okay, so if we look at the optimization problems, what is in the optimization problems? We are once again I have repeated this, that uh, the there is a continuous set of state spaces, and here the exhaustive search spaces may not be possible to take it up. Okay, and the local search methods, the problem with that is also one more thing, that is they are not able to backtrack properly. Okay, as stated earlier, they are so useful for solving optimization problems, and you have to go for an objective function and get that. Okay. Okay. So what we do in the optimization problems is that we have to have the measure of goodness. That how well are we doing? Okay. So it's called as a fitness measure or goodness of fit, etc. Such names are there, but basically it is that it's a feedback that the present state, is it really it is useful or not? Is it getting us to the goal or not? I mean, is it the goal or not? Okay, so like this, the optimization methods have been formulated. Okay, so one is called as a direct method, which is that you just have a formula. You apply that formula with respect to the inputs, you get the answer. Okay? That is a closed form approaches. We don't have to do anything there. Where we are actually searching is that where we have to generate the states, and then we are going to test them against that, whether where are we, where they are with respect to the measure of goodness. Okay, so these are the generate and test kind of things. Okay, then we also have heuristic search, and in the heuristic search, the best first search is there. Okay, that is why it is called as a hill climbing. Okay, that is you're exploring the state space, and you want to take up that part of the state space which is leading you to the highest value, fastest. Okay, then you are having iterative approaches like genetic algorithm, wherein lot of iterations will be used to search the search space. Okay, so it may not always, a genetic algorithm may not always lead you to the exact optimal value very fast, but it will get you quite fast to a close to the optimal value. Okay, so that is one of the important aspects of the genetic algorithms. So back to the school level or college level calculus, the maxima minima functions which we are there, where the derivative is 0. Okay, so that is meant by the slope of the function. So the function is neither growing nor shrinking, and so this is possible not only at the global extremum, but also at the local extremum also. So there are inflection points, as you may have remembered. There also the slope is low, is 0. So we need to apply those methods, and we are able to get that. Okay. What happens in hill climbing? In hill climbing, that we think that we are very close to the best possible situation, and so we are going on doing the iteration, wherein you find out what is the in the neighborhood which is a better improved state, and you try to go towards that. Okay, so then you try to see that which is the one which is going to take you up in the best way. Okay, but the entire problem is that there is no way for us to know that whether some minimum or maximum is a global minimum or it's a local minimum. So that is the entire catch of these such methods, that we don't know whether it is a global or a local minimum. Okay, so that is the issue actually. Okay, so that is the point about the hill climbing. So hill climbing is like, you know, that you can't see, it's a dark night, and you just have one kind of a small lamp, all right, and the lamp is just illuminating your steps in the neighborhood. Using that light, you are just trying to say that, okay, which is the better way to go, the one which is you want to get to the top of the hill. So wherever some slope is seen, you are going in that direction. You don't know whether that slope is actually going to lead you to the highest spot or not. Okay. Yeah, I think we have covered all these things. And in a algorithmic form, this is the statement of the hill climbing function. So it is given the input problem, and it is having the local variables, what is the uh, current what is the current node, what are the neighbors, and it's going to explore in the neighborhood that whether the value is improved or not. Okay, that you can see here, that this is the continuous loop in which it is going on looking at neighbors, and here is the step in when it is comparing the value of the neighbors against the current value. Okay, so then if it is better one, then it will change, and it will make the neighbor to the current value, like that, and like that it will go on. So if we consider just a single variable situation, in a single variable situation, the y-axis is plotting the value, and the x-axis is giving us that where we are with respect to the state value. Okay, so what we have to do is that, uh, as you can see, wherever in this function, wherever the highest spot is, which is the maximum value, that is a global maximum. Okay, but there is also a local maximum, and there is quite a difference between the local maximum and the global maximum. So we have to somehow go through all the points which is there on the x-axis, and we are calculating that, okay, what is the function value. We go to some point here, let us say, and let us say this point here, and we go to that point, and then we find out what the function value, what it is here, like this. Then we will just jump and maybe go to this thing, and then we find the function value, and then say, oh, this is a much better one. Okay, so like that, I will shift my search region to something like over here. Okay, then I'm just I will explore a few points here and there in the neighborhood. Then I get bored. I say that, oh, it's not really telling me something very useful. Let me jump a bit. So then I will go and jump, and I will come to say some point here, and then I will find out. They said, okay, in this neighborhood, seems to be the highest value, but it is actually, although previously you were not at the global maximum, somewhere here you are still higher than this local maximum. Okay, so how you explore this space in the hill climbing, etc., is fairly important. That you should be able to uh, search, and you should be able to come across the global maximum and not get stuck at the local maximum. Okay, that is the crucial aspect. So the steps and the step sizes and such kind of things are important, and here you can see that certain aspects of the hill climbing are shown. I will not speak too much on the hill climbing aspect, because there is quite a bit. I mean, it's fairly straightforward, and let me try to explain the complexity of the situation, because you are having, with respect to the value or the objective function, so many other kinds of complications. You can have flatness of the local maximum, and you can have a inflection, which is called as a shoulder. That is also seen here. So these are certain cases where your search will get stuck. Okay, and this is the formal statement of the hill climbing statement. I think we have already seen this. Okay, so this is again some description of the hill climbing, which I think so it's now very clear to everyone. Okay, the problems of the local maxima, etc. Okay, all right. So we can apply this hill climbing, etc., and also put it onto this Queens and all that Queens problem. Okay. So what is that h value? Suppose you have a heuristic function h, which is that the number of pairs of queens that are attacking each other directly or indirectly. Okay, so like that for each uh, mm, square you can get the number. All right. So if you say that currently the state is at 17, okay, so this is the h value for each successor in each column. All right. So one can go along that and put that value and place the queen at that point. Now here if you can see that this looks like to be a solution for the 8 queens problem, and it looks that it has succeeded to a certain extent. Okay. To me it looks like it has succeeded well. Okay, you need to look a bit more carefully to see that yes, whether it is a solution to the 8 queens problem. Okay, so these are certain problems with the hill climbing. And how do we, so basically hill climb is okay if it is a rather easy search space, but if there are a lot of local maximum, local minimums and things like that, then we need to find a way which is going to explore the space and not get stuck at the local minimum. Okay. So here certain aspects of the performance of the hill climbing method is shown, and you can see here that this is 86% of the time it gets stuck at the local minimum. Okay, so now what is the solution? We can take a solution if we avoid those states where or we just try to jump out of the known states which are a local minimum and jump out of that and try to search other part of the search space. Okay, so how do you do that? So the solutions to that are, one is called as stochastic hill climbing. So wherein which is you do a random selection amongst the uphill moves. Okay, so this approach might be trying to avoid the choice of actually getting stuck up into some kind of local maximum, because it is moving out and it is trying to sample the space. Then another one is called as random restart hill climbing. So this is trying to avoiding getting stuck in the local maximum, because once it reaches something, it will restart and start searching the space again. So in this random restarting, what happens is that you run until the termination for a fixed time, or else you run the number of restarts and like that. So the questions here would be that what is the expected number of the restarting and what is the expected number of steps which is taken, things like that. Then another new thing which is there here is like you have what is called as local beam search. So in this beam search, what you do is that you are keeping some states which are a beam level of difference from the goal state. Okay, so you'll search only within that range. Okay. So that's why with the local beam search, in some cases the convergence is good, but it's not guaranteeing that you will be able to come out of the local maximum problem. Now here is the gradient search. I hope you can see this picture here on the right hand side. So this is the top view, and this is in terms of the plots of the gradient. Okay, so you can see that how the function is taking this path and taking the steps and trying to optimize it until it's getting close to the optimal value. So here what we do is that you formulate the cost function and take the partial derivatives. And once you get the partial derivatives, then with respect to the various partial derivatives, you can evaluate the function and see that what is the direction in which it is there. And so like this, but the thing is that you have to evaluate all the partial derivatives, then only you get some direction, which is the gradient of the it is the direction of that, which is the direction of the gradient actually. Okay. And like hill climbing, you will explore more only if it is going to be better. Here is one more important thing, that many machine learning problems are cast as optimization problems. So if any of you know the support vector machines, so then you are doing a maximum margin search. Okay, in machine learning, support vector machines is just that it is doing a search to maximize the margin. What is meant by margin? Margin is that is the distance from the perpendicular distance from the decision boundary to a point which is belonging to a certain class on one side of that class. Okay, so that is the thing which is there behind the okay. So doing this kind of a local search is there. All right. So typically where we use this kind of things is that, like I was saying, you know, that you want to classify in machine learning, you want to classify the red points and the blue points, and the line which you see is a decision boundary. I want to find out what is the slope of the line which is going to give me the best result. That is, it is separating in a best manner the red points from the blue points. Okay, so that is where the optimization is required. So another type of the optimization is through the simulated annealing. So in simulated annealing, it is a similar one, that is stochastically we wish to escape from the local maximum. All right, but you are going to try to sample that. Okay, so basically the algorithm is randomized one, and you will take a step if the random number which is there is less than a value which is based upon the objective function and the temperature. So here there is a experimentation phase wherein the temperature is high. Okay, so and after that, then as the temperature reduces, then already whatever is found as the extremum is kept in mind, and the other terms are not really worth remembering. Okay, so that's a thing with the simulated annealing. So this is the simulated annealing algorithmic formulation. Okay, so basically it is that you have the temperature, which is a parameter which is controlling the downward steps. Okay, so and I can say it's an infinite loop in which there is something which is called as a time schedule. Okay, this schedule is a mapping which is that from this time to this temperature will be there. Okay, so as the temperature is reducing, generally all the temperatures are reducing. So the temperature is reducing, then the number of changes etc. will also start reducing. Okay, so this algorithm shows that how you are going to do the simulated annealing, and similarly, you know, you are comparing the different values, that is the next value versus the current value, and you get some error difference, and if the error difference is non-zero, then you can make the change, and then you can see that what is the total outcome and get the results through the probabilistic approach. So there are certain similarities with the hill climbing for simulated annealing, and there you are going to pick something randomly, and you're going to see that if it is a change in the objective function, then it is a good one. You are going to take that. Or if it is not good, then you will reject it and move on. Okay, so what is the physical interpretation of the simulated annealing? It is that you are taking a ball and you are making it to roll downhill on a function surface. Okay, now the ball may get stuck in a local minimum, but then if you shake the ball, you shake the entire thing, then the ball may jump out and it may go somewhere else, and then it will try to again find its way. Okay, so this is the idea in the basic idea. So basically what I express in the annealing is that it is the process of cooling a liquid or metal until the particles will be achieving a certain frozen crystal state. Okay. So in the simulated annealing, we seek the low energy configurations, and the free variables are treated so this way. The annealing is taking place, wherein from high energy we will go down to the low energy, and by slowly reducing the temperature, wherever the particle gets stuck, we will say that that is something which is the solution or the minimization of that annealing. But as you can see, it is stochastic. So in real world problems and things like that, what we do is that we try to run the simulated annealing a number of times, a large number of times. Okay, and through that hopefully we have explored a good part of this space, and then you can try to keep that which are the better values which it has found and like that, and go ahead with that. This is the algorithm statement for simulated annealing, like that. Okay, fine. And this is now about the genetic algorithms. Okay, I will not speak much, but it's just that what you do is that you represent the optimized problem in terms of a string, and then you manipulate that string, and then you are for each variation of that string which is produced, you are going to evaluate it, and through that you will be trying to get that what is the fitness of a particular state or value, and once that is done, then you may be able to find out like what is the solution, like in terms of trying to map back from the bits to the real world parameters and get that solution. Just a kind of figure showing the basic steps which is there in a genetic algorithm. Okay. Crossover, mutation, fitness function selection, all these things are just shown in a very cursory manner. Okay, so even genetic algorithms, that is just partitions the space, find some solutions, try to find something locally, and then may jump to somewhere else, to some other partition, something like that, and like that. You know? So it is basically trying to sample and find out that which is the best solution. Okay. Not too much on the genetic algorithms. So everything has got its plus and minus points, but with respect to genetic algorithm, what we are saying is that we are doing the random exploration, which is not going to get into the local minima. Okay, and it is also like appealing to the human ideas of evolution. Okay, what is the negative points of this this genetic algorithms? That there are so many tunable parameters. Okay, so if you have solved one problem using genetic algorithm, same approach may not work on another problem. Okay, so that is the kind of thing. Okay, now one more aspect, which is actually a major aspect of our afternoon program, which is that we are trying to see a difficult set of problems, which is called as the CSP. Okay, and the C stands for constraints. Okay, so you're putting down constraints to solutions, and we are trying to see that whether we can solve it, and within the constraints we want the best solution. Okay, so you have some aspects where backtracking may be there, local search may be there, and all that. Okay, so CSP means it is called as a constraint satisfaction problems. Okay, so what is the formation of these constraint satisfaction problems? Is that first you have the set of variables which is there, and it is a finite set of variables, and then there is a non-empty domain, set of domains, which is the domain is there which is possible for each variable. Okay, and the domain values, etc., it is subject to the constraints, and each constraint is saying that the values which can be given are limited. So what does it mean by state then? State will be that you have assigned the values to some or all of the variables. Okay, and then you will be able to evaluate that whether it was the right thing to do or wrong. Okay. So what kind of assignments we have? That the assignment is should be consistent, it is not violating the constraints. So as you can see, the constraint satisfaction problems have the generic goal and successor functions and heuristic, etc. All these things are also applicable to the constraint satisfaction problems. So this is just laying down the rules of the game, that the assignment will be completed only when every attribute for which you are wanting to do that is there with you, and then you say that a solution is that it is a complete assignment which is satisfying all the constraints. And in addition to that, the CSPs will be maximizing the objective function. So where do we find the application of these? So these are that you want to do scheduling. Okay, so scheduling of anything, it may be it may be timetable, it may be airline schedule, whichever. So those are some examples of the schedules. So here one example is being shown, and through this example we are trying to understand and explore all the various methods which are there for constraint satisfaction problems. Okay, so here this is a sort of a approximate map of the Australia, the continent island, and it is divided up into the various parts. Just like we have states in India, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, etc. Like that in Australia, they have these states. So here it is being called as Western Australia. It's called as Northern Territory, South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and it is abbreviated by these names like WA, TQ, and SW, etc. Okay, and we are having the domains, which is that they can be red, green, or blue, and then the constraint is that the adjacent regions must have the different colors. Okay, so then that only it will be a coloring solution to the problem. Okay, so and what are the other constraints? That what is this constraint? That no adjacent regions should have the same color. All right, so adjacent regions must have the different colors. So is this satisfying that? Yes, it looks like that, because although the color Western Australia and Queensland is having is the same, or even the Victoria color is the same, but it is not to the immediate neighbor. Okay, so this is a viable solution. Okay, so what is the solution? It would be looked at and called as, it would be say that WA is equal to red, NT is equal to green, Q is equal to red, and SW. Okay, so this is the assignment. And this is very much similar to the graph coloring problem. And in the graph coloring problems, they use planar graphs where there are no edge crossings. And Then came the thing, that is, it said that one of the wise men had come up with that. He said that every planar graph can be colored with 4 colors or less. Okay, so the map coloring is a planar graph kind of thing, and so that is the solution. I mean, that's basically the problem formulation. Then we have what is called as constraint graphs. So in this, what we do is that we put the nodes as the variables, and we keep whichever is the node which is connected, and we keep them as the binary constraints. And these graphs can be used to do the simplification of the search. Okay, so it can be seen that from this, suppose we see the graph and we see that this Tasmania is not at all connected. Okay, because it is a independent subproblem. Okay, so that is what it is there. And there are different varieties of the CSPs. You have what is called as the discrete variables. Okay, and then there are infinite domains. Where the discrete variable itself actually is into two parts. One part is called as the finite domains. Okay, so if you are having D, then it is order of D to the power of n number of the complete assignments. So for example, the satisfiability problem. Okay, in computation science, okay, 3 SAT is another such things are said to be NP complete and all that. Okay, so the Boolean satisfiability will be there. All right. In the infinite domains, and also like integers, strings, etc. So the job scheduling problems and such kind of things. So there also there are many solutions, infinitely many solutions. And then what are the type of constraints? That is, you can have constraints which are unary, which involve just a single variable. Okay, so you can say that maybe if you are looking at the map coloring problem, we would say that that a region which is labeled SA should not be green. That is an example of a unary constraint. Or else you might have two variables which is there and some relationship between them. So say for example, SA should not be equal to WA. Okay, so that is a binary constraint. Then there are other higher order constraints, etc., which involve more than two entities. And one of the very good examples to show the constraint satisfaction problems is this kind of crypto-arithmetic puzzle. So say in this crypto-arithmetic puzzle, I have taken these letters, okay, and I have written them against each other. I have written them like this, and I have done an admission. I have done an addition, and the proper rules of arithmetic are followed. So like if O is some number and then it is added to another O, okay, so then there will be a carryover. All right, but in this entire addition, we can see that thanks to the carryover, etc., you have that these things. Okay, so now the problem here is that how do you decipher and say that what is the numeric value of the letters which are there in this? So that is T, W, F, and U, and R, and then of course O. Okay, so that is the main purpose in the crypt arithmetic problems. So you can see that what are the variables you are having, that all the alphabets are there, and then somewhere some numbers x1, x2, x3 are coming up. How did we get that x1, x2, x3? Basically, these are the carryovers. Okay, so let's say when I added the two O's and I got an R, so then there was a carryover which is the x1. Okay, so like that, at the next one, that is between after adding the two W's and the carry in from the right hand side, the result is the carry out is the x2, and similarly after the adding of the two t's, the further carry out is the x2. Okay, and since we know that we are replacing every letter with a digit, single digit, so whatever it is that alphabet somebody may write there, but we know that there's only 1 to 9, so they'll be able to do their work and push on. So this is trying to show you that how we are having this constraints which are there, okay, and you can see that that how x3 is related, because the f and t etc. Okay, so that is there for that. So the CSP can be expressed as a standard search problem, and you have an incremental formulation with the initial state and like that. Just a slight problem here. Okay, I think so now this will work. Okay, I have to do more adjustments to see that this displays properly. So anyway, hopefully this will be visible. Okay, so we're talking about that how the CSP is a standard search problem. So here what happens is that you, like previously, you have the initial state, and how do you get the next state and all that? That is through a successor function, and that is going to assign the value to some unassigned variable, provided it is not conflicting with the constraint. So, and then you have and you have that the goal state is reached when whatever is the set of variables which is there, it is a correct assignment. Okay, so that is, it is by construction it is consistent. All right. Now, if there are n variables and we have assigned the values to them, then you can say that the depth is n. So how do we find that? We can do this assignment using a breadth first search. Okay. So, but the problem is that you may have n factorial times b to the power of n leaves, which has to be considered. Okay? It's a very huge number. And what are other properties of the constraint satisfaction problems? They are commutative. Okay? The order of any given set of actions has no effect on the others. Okay? And here you can see one example wherein it is formulated and solutions etc. can be found. So now what we have here is that naturally not every solution is going to be correct. Okay, and we have seen this already in terms of backtracking and things like that. I mean, sorry, in depth first search. So you know, depth first search also, you cannot do depth first search without backtracking. Okay, so how do you make use of this concept of the backtracking, and to see that because backtracking will be required in the constraint satisfaction problems a lot, because there is no guarantee that one set of assignment is going to give us the solution. So you have to undo that assignment and then you have to redo it with some other variations. That is what is going on in the backtracking search. And there is no heuristics and something like that. You can't have a heuristic. It is just that the methods are uninformed approach. Okay, so let us now try to solve this coloring problem for the Australia with this example. So we are going to see that how certain assignment will not work. We have to do a backtracking. Okay, so suppose this is the initial one, and we are going to start with Western Australia being colored red, like that. Okay, so essentially these three things are roughly the same. Okay, but now if we, what are the variations? Once I fix the constraint that Western Australia has to be red, then the other two constraints are the possibilities that this one which is there in the middle on top, it is either green or else it is then blue, because after all there are only three colors. Okay, so and then here you can see some different variations which are there of that. So if as we go on and assign certain colors, what are the options or possibilities which is left? Okay, so you can see that how it is proceeding from the left side is something like a depth first search, all right, and how it is proceeding with respect to that. Okay, so they have run these things, and with backtracking and all such kind of things, they have found out that what kind of solutions are possible and things like that, and given some comparisons. Okay. Okay. So question then next is that how do we improve further the CSP efficiency? Basically, earlier we are doing just in uninformed search. Now, if we introduce certain heuristics, and we can look at, this is a kind of a different type of heuristic actually. These are the general purpose methods, and that So basically, what is taking place in the CSP is that you want to say that which should be the variable which should be assigned a value next, and what is the order in which the set of values should be tried. Okay, and is it that is going to work or not? If it is not going to work, we should be able to know that it is not working. Okay, so that is the failure detection should be, if it is possible to be done earlier, that is going to be better. Okay, and is there a way to take advantage of the problem structure? These are some common questions which is with respect to the improving the efficiency of the constraint satisfaction problem structure. Now here we can see one heuristic which is called as the minimum remaining value. Okay, that is called as the MRV heuristic. Let me just try to adjust the slide somewhat. Okay, now it is visible for you. So minimum remaining value is the name of the heuristic. All right. So what you have to do is that you try to pick up and assign that variable which is having the maximum number of constraints. Okay, so what is the answer with that? The answer is that with that you are most likely very quickly to come to a failure state from which you have to then backtrack. Okay, so basically it is like as you explore more and more of the failure situations, and you have backtracked, you are then going to be left with more and more of the successful parts of the space. Okay, that is basically the idea behind this kind of heuristic. And one more heuristic then is that the degree heuristic for the initial variable. So suppose it's a graph, the node with the highest degree. Okay, means that that is the highest constraint, the one which is most constrained. Okay, because everything else is depending upon that. So you try to assign that, and then you can come to that solution faster, because you will get to know that the solution space will lie, which is including that value assignment for the initial variable. Okay? If a solution lies, or else then, which means that that assignment of the initial variable is not going to ever give you a solution, then which means that you can discard that and then try to search for something else. Okay, so that is the kind of thing. So as you can notice here, that these central regions are the ones which are connected most in the map. So why not assign a color to that first, and see that whether you can succeed on that. Okay, so once again, so anyway, one more heuristic then is called as the least constraining value for the value ordering. Okay? So here, everywhere where we are working, we are trying to show it through this map example. So what is the least constraining value? Now this is a totally different philosophy. That is, you take up one and uh, do the assignment to see that the rest of it is as free as possible. Okay, so here what is the heuristic rule? That you are given a variable, you should choose the least constraining value, which means it is going to give the maximum flexibility for the subsequent assignments. Okay, so here, so in this map, say for example, I choose my coloring to start from the leftmost situation. Okay, so then what it means is that I can give that the color assignment, and we can then try to see that what is the solution. Okay, and there is now a heuristic which is called as forward checking. So in the forward checking, what you do is that you are trying to keep and maintain the set of things which is tried for each one of the variables. So you can see here that for each one of the variables, this has been tried out. All right. So uh, and the idea is that behind this checking, sorry. Um, so you're keeping track of what are the legal values for the unassigned variables, and you will terminate search if you cannot make any further assignments. All right. So this is called as a forward checking. Okay. So this is the idea that once you're choosing some set of variables, and then you try to get the solution, and is it possible to move forward or not? So if it is not possible, then you have to terminate the search. Okay. So say for example, here we start with and we make an assignment that, let us say, the leftmost corner
Hello, Atul sir. Your voice is not audible.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are things working now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I have some problem maybe with some ISP thing. I switched to another one. Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, meaning I have multiple ISP kind of connections. So for occasions like this. So all right. So what I was saying is that the constraints, you can see here this graph on the right hand side, this graph is called as the constraint graph. All right. So what we are having is that the variables are named and then the connections to the various other variables. And you can see that the most constrained variable is SA. All right. Okay. And this method, which is called as forward checking, what we do is that we will make some assignment, and then after that we are going to see the effect of that, to see that in what way we can make the further assignments. All right. So suppose if we take up one thing and we say that Q is set to be green. Queensland is, that is this one. If we assign that to be green, what are the effects on the others? Okay. So those which are, then there is constraints with those with the WA. So in which it says that uh, because Q is green, this is adjacent. So this cannot be green. So if Q is green, this cannot be green. If Q is green, this cannot be green. Okay. So like this, those things can be checked and you can formulate and put that here. Okay. So this is, in this way you can do the forward checking of the constraints, and then you can see that. Okay. So you can see that which is that it leaves out that the WA assignment can be read. All right. So then you are having these two things, that is what can be green, what can be red. Okay. And the as I was saying that the MRV is uh, minimum remaining values approach. Okay. So as per the minimum remaining values approach, you can automatically select the NT or the SA as the next one to be assigned. So that way, so the point is that the partial assist in a partial assignment itself, you will be able to find out a failure, say, and you will say that it is inconsistent with the constraints. So that then you have to backtrack. Okay. So previously we said that we are going to have that the W will be red and then the Q will be green. What else is possible? So then we find out that we cannot do the assignment for the other things with this kind of thing. So we have to do a backtracking from that. Okay. The same approach can be applied to the four queens problem and how the backtracking can take place. Suppose I take that the first one is that it is over there, the one. Okay, what will happen to the other placements? So this is showing that what cannot be the forward checking and all is showing that what cannot be placed, where it cannot be placed. Okay, so then we are making the second assignment, and then when we check, okay, we are doing the forward checking. So when we check that, we find that those are the others which cannot be placed. Now comes the next one. Okay, so which means that so many things were ruled out. So that's why we withdrew that previous placement and we found a new placement. And now if we check with that, we are finding that some things are possible. But still further, we can see that there is no way to place the fourth one. Okay, so that is itself means that we have to do some backtracking. Now where do we have to backtrack? All right, so like that. So quite obviously that this first placement itself was wrong, so we have to backtrack from that one. Okay, so that is the kind of problem which is there. Okay, so this is the constraint graph, and you can see the variables and all that, and we have to find the solution using these heuristics, which is the minimum value heuristic, a degree heuristic, and the forward checking kind of heuristic. Okay, so that way you can get the various different values, and you can see what kind of solutions will be possible to get with that. Okay, now when all of these things are tried out, what is the computational effects, and that is shown here, and that. Okay. Uh, One more approach is, it is called as the constraint propagation. So in the constraint propagation, you will apply the combination of the heuristic and the forward checking. So that is somewhat more efficient than just the either approach, that is either just the heuristic or the forward checking only. Okay, so if we apply that, the constraint propagations, they are trying to eliminate. So the techniques which somewhat complementary remove the part of the search space, and the constraint propagation is still better because it is putting the constraints locally, so that this could be faster to be effective. Okay. Then one more approach which is there is called as the arc consistency. So what is the definition or meaning of that? The arc of the assignment is consistent if for every value of x there will be some value of y which is consistent with x. Okay, so this is a directed property. So like let's say if uh, the SA to the NSW is consistent if the SA is equal to blue and the NSW is equal to red. Okay, so uh, as obviously they are neighboring, as long as they are different, there is not a problem. Okay, so like x to y is consistent if for every value of x there is some value y consistent with x. Okay, so now if NSW to SA is consistent if the NSW equal to red and SA equal to blue. Okay, so is that working out? So you can see that NSW equal to red and SA equal to blue, it is the same. Yeah, it's so it should be working out. But if you further search, you may not be working out. Okay, so like that. So then when you check further, then you find that if one of them is to be red, then it will not work. So that has to be removed. Okay, so like that. So we continue to propagate the constraints, and we can find out that we cannot proceed further. Okay, so that's why the arc consistency checking is there and it is required, but it is computationally more this one. And here is the arc consistency approach, which is written here. So basically what you do is that the things are put into a queue and you are going to check one by one, and you are going to see that if it is inconsistent, then you have to remove that. Okay, so basically that is what is there, and for that purpose you have one function which is called as the remove inconsistent. Okay, and it will go to the domain, it will check the domain, and it will see that the constraints are satisfied. Then if it's okay, otherwise then it will delete that one, it will be removed. Okay, so the old one, but still this is a quite a consistent. I mean, it's a fairly good solution, and it is long in use for that. Maybe this is another kind of a problem graph wherein the coloring etc. is there to be tried out. Okay, and AAC3 kind of thing would be there. Okay, now maybe I'll skip these kind of things, like it can be extended to K consistency, and it can be done in the message parsing, etc. Okay, so these kind of things there. There is one more method which is called as the intelligent backtracking. Okay, I think there is a lot to go into this. Maybe I cannot complete if I get stuck in only in this. Okay, I'll skip these things, and this is all somewhat more specialized. Okay, actually one thing which I have not shown here, yeah, I think we can come to the close of it, and we can sort of complete this one here. Um, what I have not covered is the adversarial search. So I'll try to give you an example or idea of the adversarial search with that. So Let's see if I can find that. Okay. So what I have left out is the adversarial search, which is for the games in the game playing. So this is in continuation from the constraint satisfaction problems. Okay. So now they have done some psychological studies that how it works with human beings and things like that. Okay. Now, if you are following AI recently, you may have followed that uh, chess at chess the game playing the computer systems are better than human beings, things like that you might be hearing. And then some Go kind of game is there, and a deep learning variation of deep AlphaGo or something like that. Okay, so how is AI being applied to these kind of game playing situations? That is through the adversarial search. Okay, so in the adversarial search, basically you have that it is not a single agent which is trying to solve the problem. We are actually having two agents, and each of the agents will be working in alternation. So first one agent will play, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. So that it will continue like that. Okay, so this is the kind of adversarial kind of situation with the two agents. And the problems are generally constructed in such a way that it is like if one will lose, other one has to win. If one has to win, the other one has to lose. Okay, so that is the situation is totally opposite for the others. Okay, so that is what creates the adversarial situation. Okay, they, I mean, like all they say, in this management scenarios like win-win and all that. No, it is no win-win. It is win-lose or lose-win. Okay, so like that. Then what are the other things? As I have explained to you, environments. The environments are fully observable. Okay, so that is, and in the there is something which is called as game theory. So you are using what we call as deterministic turn-taking zero-sum games of perfect information. Okay, so all these board games like chess, etc., they can be called as that. And there are generalizations to the stochastic games, to the multiple player games, and the non-zero sum games, etc. Okay. So what is the difference of the search versus the gameplay? So earlier, whatever we were doing the search, there was no adversary. Okay, so you are just going around, you're trying to search and get a solution, and the heuristic method is applied so that you can find a goal. However, in the games, it is going to be a bit different. And in the search methods, you can look around and you may try to find the optimal solution, and you have a function which is going to estimate from the start to the goal. Okay. However, there are time limits in the game situation wherein you cannot find the optimal solution. You have to be satisfied in an approximate solution, and at each position or situation you have to find out that what is the goodness of that game situation. Okay, so the examples for the search, I mean the games which are generally used using this thing is the chess, the checkers, etc. kind of board games which are there. So what are all the types of games which are there where such methods can be applied and used is that you can see that where the games are of perfect information, that is chess, checkers, Go, etc. Or the chance games, which is a backgammon, Monopoly, some wherever the dice throwing is required, those are the chance games. And those games which are still most complex, where you don't have the proper information at all. Okay, so say for example, contract bridge. Okay, in contract bridge, which is a card game, so you get to see only a part of the cards which is there. You have to guess, or you have to see that which are cards may be there with whom. Okay, like that. So in all these adversarial games, as it is said, the two players, say max and a min, is there. So if max is to maximize, then min is to minimize. Okay, so that is the way it will be operating. And the same search methods are going to be used. And the only thing is that you will have the initial state to be set up, which is the board configuration, and then you're having the successor function, which is that how the next set of moves is going to be generated and all that. Okay, and then is the game over or not, some kind of a test will be there. And you have a utility function which gives that what is a win or lose, and then that value will be propagated like that. So if if uh, if so if we have that B is a branching factor, and D is the number of moves by we have a search tree which is of the order of B to the power of D. Okay, so typically if you look at what is say a chess game, so B will be order of 35, and D is of the order of 100. Okay, so which means that how big is the search tree we have to look at is 10 to the power of 154. Okay, that's a very huge number. No? So that's why chess is supposed to be a very difficult game. And not only for, I mean, it is difficult for not only humans, but also for the computer systems, because the search space is such a very big search space. But then, even then, the computers have been able to master the chess playing because of certain things. So, or else, let's say if there is a we can explore and see that, suppose you are having much simpler thing, which is like tic-tac-toe. This is just to show to you that what can be done in terms of the adversarial aspect, max min max min max min kind of thing. Okay, so that is, suppose the game is starting, the first player is max, who is supposed to put a cross mark. Okay, so where is it that so then the next player is a min player who is going to put a circle mark. Okay, so for the min player, the max player can put a cross mark in any of the positions, but the min player has to be able to see that, okay, where it is going to place it once if the max player has placed that circle mark, I mean okay, the cross mark. Okay, so like that. So each player subsequently will see that what all are the situations which are possible for it to place and where they are, and try to pick up the best out of that lot. Okay, so the way to, how do we search this tree to find the optimal move? Okay, so you have what is called as a min-max strategy, and we have that both of them are going to be working optimally. Okay, so you have what is called as a min-max approach. So in the min-max approach, what we do is that we will just simply reverse the value which we are getting from the previous level. All right. So because this is because the maximization of one will lead to the minimization of the other. Okay, so that's why it is called as min-max. Here, let me try to show you some example with just a kind of a hypothetical game tree. Suppose the game is started with a max player. Okay, and at the end of the outcome, these numbers are indicating what is the values for the outcome. So if we know the values of the outcome, and we know that the previous player is going to be, I mean, the player is going to be min, so we can say that, we can predict and say that, because they are all rational agents. All right, so, and they will always pick up the best one. Okay, so if this min player is there, it is not going to pick up 12 or 18. It is going to pick up 3, which is the least of these values. Okay, so that's why that's a minimizing level. Okay, so we can see that out of all these three, for the minimizing one, the values will be 3, 2 or 2. Okay, and as anyway, so it will be. So the thing is that Max is also knowing that 3 will be the best thing which is there, I mean, for him. So he is going to pick up and choose that will be the way in which he is going to go. Okay? Because he is going to maximize his thing, whereas the other one wants to minimize it. Okay? So this is the way, knowing all these values, Max will take the decision to go towards that, which is of 3. Okay? And so I mean, the players have to play optimally, then only these predictions will work. So what and if the next one makes a mistake, then the opponent will certainly be making still will be doing better than that. Okay? So what is the complexity of all these things? So if we look at that, we see that the min-max algorithm has a complexity of order of b power of m. It is a depth first search, so that's why the space is only order of b times m. How do we make min-max to be still better? Okay, this is the code for the min-max. How can we make min-max to be still better? So what we do is that we have what is called as alpha beta pruning approaches. Okay, so I'll skip this and see if there is alpha beta pruning. So what is the thing in the alpha beta pruning is that you are going to search and you are seeing that only certain values can be realized. All right, so with that you can still further curtail the range of values which is possible, and through the alpha beta pruning, as you can see here, you will get the and get the limits of that. And alpha beta pruning is very effective. You can search 2x times deeper with the alpha beta pruning, and all the DeepMind and all those kind of game programs, they are very much souped up versions of the alpha beta pruning, but essentially the same concept is applied. Okay, I think I'm nearing to close of my end of the time. So with that, I think maybe I should come to close and stop here. And okay, I'll just summarize here that what is it we have done. We have seen that constraint satisfaction problems in this session, and we have seen the heuristics which are there for the constraint satisfaction, and the graph structures, okay, which are related to that. Basically, that is what we covered in the post-lunch session. Okay. With that, I thank everyone for their patient listening, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. If there are any questions, comments, such things, my mail ID is there. Feel free to send a mail to that. Okay. So with that, I will conclude my speaking, and I will be happy to listen to any questions and queries if there are any. Okay, I'm closing the presentation, and I'm going to be looking at the messages in the chat.
Participants, if you have any queries, kindly post your questions in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm just seeing the message. Okay, looks like it is received well. So thank you everyone for listening patiently. Okay. Okay, so there is a question that is that do the decision trees follow the search algorithms? So when we build decision trees, we want the decision tree to be optimal. Okay, so say like ID3 and other such kind of things, they are trying to optimize. They are trying to optimize in terms of the information gain. Okay, so the decision trees are also some type of search algorithms. Fine. So looks like no, not many other further questions.
Any other questions, participants? Okay. Myself, Dr. Rajeshwari Devi. I thank Dr. Atul Negi for delivering the lecture on search algorithms. So we had a detailed description of the different types of search algorithms based on informed and uninformed techniques. So based on the optimization technique, we came to know about some of the search algorithms like greedy search algorithm, A star, graph tree, then depth first, breadth first, and some of the local search techniques. So it was a very informative session, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation as a resource person. So I hope the participants are enriched by the knowledge on search algorithms. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Fine then. Thank you, everyone. I'm have to go to another meeting, so I'll be leaving this call. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day. Thank you, participants, for participating in the session. And we'll be meeting tomorrow with a new link. We'll be sharing the link at the earliest possible. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.